Excellent. So it's a great pleasure and honour for me to be chairing this session that features four of my very good friends and colleagues from Tbilisi here. And they're going to be sharing with you their latest thinking and developments on the way that Georgian ethnomusicology and the study of traditional music is developing today, and they're going to give us insights into some of their own research projects as well. So the way that we're going to organise the session is that they're each going to speak for 15 minutes. I'm going to give a very gentle ring of the bell at 15 minutes, and they will then have a couple of minutes to conclude if they need to do so. But we should then still have plenty of time for questions following all of the presentations. We've got until 4 o'clock for this session. So I hope you will enjoy learning more about Georgian polyphonic singing and other things. So our first speaker is Professor Rusudan Tsurtsumia, who is based here at the Conservatoire. She's also the director of the very wonderful International Research Centre for Traditional Polyphony, which has been doing some fantastic work in recent years, both doing research into Georgian polyphonic singing traditions and also starting up all sorts of very productive conversations with scholars elsewhere in the world who are also carrying out research into polyphony. So Rusudan is going to speak to us today about new approaches in Georgian ethnomusicology. Thank you, Rusudan.
Thank you. Our panel presentation entitled New Approaches in Georgian Ethnomusicology, presented by 4 authors, deals with the new approaches emerged in the 21st century Georgian ethnomusicology. For me, it's important that in Georgia, these novelties appear not as separate precedents, but as certain tendencies which are determined by the necessity to conceptualize live musical practice in Georgian reality. Thus, this is the vision brought by Georgian ethnomusicology to Georgian ethnomusicology by time. I will stop on the problem of revival as presentation, which is our panel presentation's leading idea. Unlike Central Europe, where comparative musicology started with a study of foreign exotic cultures, in many East European countries, including Georgia, musical folkloristics initially studied its own music. One of the main reasons for this was the understanding of native music's role in the ascertainment of society's identity. This is why in folk music study, all attention of Georgian musicians, among them Dmitry Ishvili of the beginning of the 20th century, was directed towards its musical structure, particularly to the search of its original feature, which became the basis of the Georgian national professional musical language. The study of Georgian folk music as a musical phenomenon lasted almost all century. On the basis of the enormous material collected since the turn of the 19th-20th centuries, the scholars fundamentally processed theoretical issues of Georgian folk music. Their approach to traditional music was essentially the same as in European comparative musicology. As Neth mentions, scholars writing before about the 1850s wrote about musical cultures as they existed at the moment. Following the independence of 1918-1921, Georgia found itself again a part of Russian Empire, but this time under the totally violent communist regime, more severe than the Tsarist one, which hid its hypocritical policy behind the idea of friendship among people. There was created the paradoxical situation in folk performance of Georgia. On the one hand, folk music became significant attribute in cultural life of wide masses. Thousands of people of various professions participated in regular inspections on Olympiads. Folk music practice reached huge scales, and the existence of innermost collectives, unusual for Georgian folklore, became a norm. Folklore turned into an official art, which as a rule comprised of the song about collective farms, communist leaders, and party. I'd like to offer you a short video is fragment from movie of the 1980s, 1940s. And it isn't a song about party leaders, but it is typical for the village in Imereti, West Georgia. This is some festive occasion. That such folk ensembles were directed by the bearers and grandmasters of traditional music, who managed to maintain the spirit of Georgian ensemble music making in large collectives and to include complex examples of traditional song alongside the contemporary ones in their repertoire. Now there is the fragment, only short fragment, from the State Ethnographic Choir from the 1950s. Wait. Excuse me. State care about folk song, as well as numerous folkloristic expeditions, contributed to the preservation of active performance practiced by people, despite the ideological pressure. If we add to this the patriarchal lifestyle of Georgian villages in the 20th century, we will easily understand Yvette Grimaud. She was a French ethnomusicologist who, despite the resistance of security organs, visited Georgia to record folk songs in 1967, and she wrote following her visit to village singers. These people lived in the Old Testament. Later, other changes were added to laws determined by social and ideological reasons. From the 1960s, introduction of the so-called improved, it has tempered musical instruments in practice and creation of non-traditional instrumental orchestras. From the 70s, active invasion by it has pop music by folk song, and it was very popular at that time. For example, this is example of as a urban song was used by the pop music ensemble in 1970s. Totalitarian politics by politics of absolute liberalism, we received an extremely diverse palette for the functioning of Georgian traditional music. live tradition bearers in the villages, large number of folk ensembles competing with each other to the so-called authentic performance manner in the regions and cities. There are also so-called state ensembles, some of which audaciously wrap traditional music and dance in modern manner. There are many children's ensembles in studios of song and dance, etc. In addition, folk folk music was a foothold in the industry of Georgian show business. Very popular among the society are so-called author songs created in folk manner. The communist ideology particularly prohibited the research of traditional culture in social-cultural context. For the official policy, categorically unacceptable were people's cult religious beliefs. It fought with fire and sword against the church, public rituals, and so on. Due to this traditional, folk music turned into the art of poor academic performance with standard behaviors and costumes. In the 80s, folklorist Georgian Traditional decided to perform folk music on the stage in his usual environment as much as possible. For this, he created a song theory which performed the song they had studied during the long expeditions in villages. Since then, the theme of changes was indirectly introduced in Georgian folkloristics. Here is an example. Performers of folk songs and chants choir masters and folklorists have argued about the authenticity of song and chant performance, implying its initial genuineness, which is undoubtedly linked with the problem of changes. Georgian ethnomusicologists themselves had negative attitude to these changes going on in the folk music. They distanced from them and pretended not to notice the real situation and thus expressed their attitude to them. I should say that this is still topical among specialists. The same cannot be said about the rest of Georgian society, which is fairly tolerant to modern forms of musical expression, including the newer, renewal traditional music. The theory of revivalist movement, Tamara Livingston, Caroline Beatle and others, created in Western ethnomusicology, reveals various aspects for music revival in Oxford textbook Music Revival. Caroline Beatle discusses the renewal impulses, innovations and other issues accompanying this process in her special article dedicated to Georgian traditional polyphonic music. I'm not going to discuss these issues now, of the more that Beatle's article draws the real picture extensively and convincingly. I would like to suggest revival as the concept of folk preservation of traditional music. As Asafir wrote, music is a process and exists only when it sounds, but it cannot be accurately repeated in live performance. And as George Liszt writes, all humanly produced music shares at some extent a particular characteristic. True performance of what is considered to be the same item always differ in some manner. Rusudan claims to be claims the same. He recalls Heraclitus' well-known phrase, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." New interpretation is a new articulation, which in given moment depends on the performer's mood and psycho-emotional state. And so, as Nettle wittily writes, he can always tell you, "Come back and see me next Thursday." As far as constant changeability is one of the determinants of traditional music, and constant renewal the primary manifestation of its viability, revival of traditional music implies its preservation. The attempts to preserve traditional music unchanged are futile. As well as Bartek writes, the attempt to revive old song in the village is utopia. New forms of traditional music result from the disintegration of folklore genre stylistic and intentional structure. They are based on different regularities, and what is very important in individualized human society, lose their anonymity, become authors. This is why it is impossible to refer to this music as traditional in old sense. Despite this, this is the only way for traditional music to survive under modern conditions, as well as the way for its participation in the formation of society's national identity. It can definitely be said that the folk epoch, in traditional sense, has passed by. I think the situation we can express by the paraphrase of Izalis and Trotsky's work. Folklore is going, folklore is coming. Folklorism is the case when folklore is received in ready-made form, not in traditional transmission from generation to generation, informal way, but in formal way. A great wealth of 21st century Georgian traditional music is when, alongside the large diversity of its new forms, we can speak about the authentic performance of the surviving tradition bearers in the villages. However, this can conditionally be called genuine and authentic folklore, as the exams have lost their primary function and are performed even by tradition bearers, basically for listeners on stage or simply for fun. Now we can say this is a work. It is the song which was performed by during the wrestling, but now is performed at the festival occasions. For example, this. Youth ensembles cannot be called authentic in the old sense as well, as they have studied traditional song via formal learning. Today, some Georgian folklorists and performers try to turn authentic to the exams which initiate the performance manner of expedition recorded as accurately as possible. The number of such is quite large. However, in Georgia, there are the ensembles striving to achieve more freedom and be more creative in interpretation within the frame of tradition. And it is impossible to speak about exact imitation in oral performance. This process resembles the interpretation of professional music examined by musician performers. In any case, these changes are inevitable. So we can enumerate some ways for preservation and transmission of traditional music inculcated in Georgian reality. The transmission of songs in informal conditions by the tradition bearers in the villages or in families, imitation of songs in the performance manner of field recordings as accurately as possible by the folk ensembles, interpretation of folk songs freely in the frame of the tradition, creation of new forms by using the elements of traditional music, author songs, fusion forms, and so on. Despite the quality of its changeability, reproduced or transformed traditional music has already been renewed, and both ways serve for the preservation of tradition. This meets the historically established paradigm of Georgian culture. respect of the tradition, and at the same time strive for its enrichment by other cultural achievements. To this also testifies the viewpoint of tradition bearers, according to which, as Nettle writes, changes are part of defensive strategy, neither good nor bad, but necessary. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rusudan, for a wonderful paper and some fantastic musical examples there in perfect timing. So Teo will set up for the next paper. So while she's getting ready, I'll introduce Teona Lomsadze, who is a PhD student here at the Conservatoire and is also part of the team at the Research Centre. And she's going to speak to us about her research into Georgian ethno-fusion groups. Thank you, Teo.
Hello, I'm really happy that I'm here and I can introduce my paper to you. Georgian ethno-fusion groups, another alternative for the preservation of traditional music. The revival process of traditional music is characterized by multiple aspects, and as a rule, several different layers can be identified in it. Currently, there are three major layers in Georgian folk music revival. First, stage performance of original folk music defined as a secondary folklore by Georgian ethnomusicologist Elisha Garabanidze. Second, contemporary folk music samples called pseudo-folklore in everyday life, created by individual authors via modernization of traditional music elements. And third, musical pieces resulting from the synthesis of traditional and popular music, which we unite under the definition of ethno-fusion. The latter is the newest among the other layers of traditional music revival and is characterized by a larger variety of manifested forms. The paper will discuss Georgian ethno-fusion direction and, on the basis of demonstrated examples, present it as an alternative for the preservation of Georgian traditional music. Also analyze the motivations of Georgian ethno-fusion music authors and performers, so-called music revivalists. As we know, during the Soviet regime, estrada music was a kind of analog to the Western pop music, which belonged to light and amusing music contrary to classical, the so-called serious music. Georgia's problem of closed borders and almost no contact with the West resulted in the establishment of some local forms of music expression. Despite common Soviet unrefined sound of locally produced electric instruments and the influence of Russian schlagers, Georgian Soviet estrada managed to obtain a distinct niche. Already after the World War II, some Western musical traditions, for instance Glenn Miller Orchestra tunes, were imported from American movies, which greatly influenced Georgian estrada music. But its originality was achieved first of all by the incorporation of Georgian traditional music elements. On the one hand, rural folk music, and on the other hand, the so-called urban music, created by contemporary Georgian composers based on Georgian traditional urban music, Western branch. As a result, very first local estrada music groups bore original Georgian sound. From the 1970s, when political pressure was more or less reduced, different popular music was imported from the West, mainly via the Voice of America on radio, international festivals, and recordings secretly brought to Georgia by different sources. As a result, local rock, jazz, and underground scenes were established. In the contrary of Western pop-influenced Russian estrada music, the connection of Georgian estrada to the Western world was revealed in the application of swing, jazz, and later rock music. Most predictably, this is the reason why first fusion forms of Georgian folk and Western popular music were created in ethno-jazz direction. Another popular combination of Georgian and Western music was a mixture of rock and alternative music with Georgian folk elements. One can say that after the 1970s, this was the most common ethno-fusion form in Soviet Georgian music. Majority of the estrada groups with rock influence in some moment of their career were touching Georgian folk music, but it mostly had an experimental character. However, it was a good way to spread local folk tunes among the alternative-minded youngsters and change their understanding of folk music from Soviet musical attribute to maker of cultural individuality. After restoring independence in 1991, borders were widely open to Western culture. Although because of the country's difficult socio-economical state, musical life of the decade was not as active. Despite this, popularity of folk music as a part of the ethnic culture slowly kept growing. In 2001, UNESCO assigned to Georgian polyphonic songs the status of masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. This in turn contributed to the increased prestige of Georgian musical folklore, both on local and international levels. At the same time, globalization and internet dissemination supported increasing Georgians' awareness of Western music and musical tendencies. As a result, Georgian ethno-fusion music development went further, variety of genres gradually expanded, and pop, alternative, progressive, and electronic music styles also appeared. If we observe recent Georgian ethno-fusion scene, we can see that largest number of bands are representatives of ethno-jazz direction, which is highly respected by music lovers, musicians, and music critics here. However, due to the restricted number of listeners, they still can't hold mainstream band status. Not even today's most popular Georgian ethno-jazz band EDL, which is frequent participant of international jazz festivals abroad, and also represents Georgian culture in EU summits in Strasbourg. We can listen to example. Oops. I'm sorry. Sure, I can fix that.
Mouse, gidiyoruz. Mouse gidiyoruz. Tamam.
The band has the potential of being influential for the further development of Georgian ethno-jazz direction, just like the ethno-jazz band Adio in the 1990s. Both bands were created by composer David Malazonia, who still follows his original conception about Georgian folk music application. Quote, "It is not a modernization of folk music or its translation into contemporary language. We just use this musical language as a construction equipment to build our original compositions from it. This is our only aim." Since Soviet period, several foreigner jazzmen have collaborated with Georgian folk musicians. although the most popular project Voisa was recently realized by a young Georgian jazz pianist and composer Georgian Traditional, together with his American band and Georgian state folk ensemble Basiani. This project, financially supported by Georgian Chanting Foundation, was mostly oriented to foreign musical markets, but as a result of proper PR campaign, it also had gained recognition in Georgia. Despite high professionalism of the members, the project seems to be short-term oriented, and from this perspective, its influence on this development of Georgian ethno-fusion is less predictable. Let's listen to them.
We all are here looking for peace, some common ground that we all can't reach. A place to unpack for glory deceased, a legacy of forever though life is least. Similarities I see with my peeps overseas. Georgians working hard, praying at the saints' knees. To climb the highest mountain like Caucasus to breeze, the feeling like a cold stare the world dared you to see. My family never thought that they would see us. To me, the highest mountain wasn't Motown, we passed it with ease. Everything wasn't the cakewalk, we still achieved. We had each other through the hard times to build a reprieve. And we gon' go back to those neighborhoods, buy all the houses that try to take us down with police. Get the good tax money in, school all seas, till the mountain that was barren as a public retreat.
And so on. Sorry. From the newly established ethno-fusion direction, I would emphasize ethno-electronica and the project Kakhaberi and Khanumebi. In addition to being a musician, Kakhaber is a producer and promoter, and probably he'll be a mayor of Batumi because he just announced he's going to take part in elections. That's really interesting. And all these occupations has affected creation of his musical style and well-shaped image to successfully sell his production. His compositions are constructed on quotations from Georgian polyphonic songs performed by the vocal trio Khanumebi, while Kakhaber plays electronics and drums and builds musical sound around this folk material. Let's listen. Sorry. We can say that progressive folk direction in Georgian folk fusion is presented by distinct and original music. The bands Tbilisi and Soinari create folk atmosphere by emphasizing guitar sounds and vocal folk elements. As a result, their music is characterized in soft, pleasant sound, satisfying almost any musical taste. Musician Nino Razmadze can be acknowledged as a true pop folk artist, having relatively larger audience and popularity than any ethno-fusion artist in Georgia. In his band, Tsurtsumia, Nias is a lead vocalist and performer on traditional Georgian string instruments, panduri, changuri and joneri. As his grandmother was French, in his music, Nias combines Georgian and French folk music with rock, pop and reggae elements. Even superficial analysis demonstrates interesting variety of not only musical styles but also the motivations of local ethno-fusion musicians to use Georgian folk music. As Livingstone writes, music revival is shaped by social, political and economic circumstances which motivated revivalists to take action in the first place. Having into consideration all three factors, the following motivations can be found: connecting with the ancestors' culture and thus expressing their ethnic national identity, attracting listeners by originality and exotics of Georgian folk music, creating individual and distinct musical style, becoming competitive and well sold in the world market. For instance, David Malazonia's motivation of creating his music was caused by two factors: perception of his own roots and from it, the need for establishing individualism. Quote, "From deep inside we feel this is our roots. We have the feeling of real and true, connected to it. Why to do a secondary production by copying and imitating American jazzmen, for instance, when you already have the shortest way for expressing and demonstrating your individualism, which is basically essential in music?" For Nino Razmadze, using Georgian folk elements is a fairly non-conscious process, a natural road for his self-expression. Kachaber properly estimated the exotics and commercial value of the Georgian folk music and uses its potential in achieving recognition as a contemporary artist on the international stage. Contemporary Georgian ethno-fusion scene is relatively small compared with some Eastern European countries sharing the same Soviet past. As I had a chance to carry out research in Estonia, I've seen that the majority of the local musicians, folk musicians, also have ethno-fusion bands, where they express their artistic creativity and individuality. Folk festivals present this music together with original folklore, thus creating a local market for them. As a long-term result, local folk festivals encouraged lots of young musicians to explore their musical culture and realize their own musical ideas through Estonian folk fusion genre. In comparison, the Georgian ethno-fusion scene, mostly based on short-term projects or different artist experiments, sometimes remains in the shadow from the large audiences. The majority of ethno-fusion profile holder bands are oriented to concerts and tours abroad, as the Georgian musical market doesn't provide enough profit. Despite the impressive number of original Georgian folk music ensembles and children's folk studios, the majority of young Georgians still find it difficult to express themselves via original folk music, as their contemporary lifestyle, modern musical soundscape, and values of the globalized world makes them choose different mediums of self-expression. Ethno-fusion music has the power not only to preserve certain Georgian folk music elements, but also to reduce distance between modern Georgians and their own musical culture. Folk fusion bands should be highly supported as a creative state in the folk music field, which bears the potential of self-cultivation, renewal, and in this way development. In conclusion, it is an unquestionably positive tendency to have such a variety of experiments in Georgian ethno-fusion, with the desire of revivalists to integrate with the West and at the same time to demonstrate their own cultural uniqueness and originality. It is obvious that Georgian ethno-fusion has great potential to be another alternative for the preservation of Georgian traditional music, creatively understanding the concept of tradition and supporting its continuity. As Ronstorm states, revival is only partly about what once was. More importantly, it is about what is and what is to come. Or to put it differently, in essence, revival is a process of traditionalization, what goes on in the present to create symbolic ties to the past for reasons of the future. Oh my God, thank you.
Thank you very much to Teona for another very rich and full paper, and I think it's really important. There's so much emphasis and so much energy being put into the traditional polyphonic singing. It's very, very important to know that all of this is happening in Georgia as well, and to see what young people are doing, the experiments that they're having, and to hear about this in a way that is not feeling threatened by change, I guess. So thank you very much, Teo, for sharing all of your work on that. And our next speaker is going to be Nino Razmadze. She is another PhD student here at the Conservatoire, and she has also been involved in some very interesting projects that have helped revive singing back in the villages in Anchara, for instance, using some of the recordings that are in the collection of the Conservatoire. There's a lot of that kind of work going on too. So very good examples of applied ethnomusicology from these people on this panel. So Nino, when you're ready, Nino is going to talk today, though, not about polyphony, but about the Georgian panpipe and the way in which it's caught between tradition and innovation. Thank you, Nino.
Thank you. Hello. Now I will talk about Georgian musical instruments, about Georgian panpipe, Larchemi, Soinari, tradition and innovation. Introduction. Within the process of traditional music renovation, the transformation of folk music instruments is topical in every culture. Tempered instruments of different sizes manufactured with modern technology from non-traditional materials have actually been used since the beginning of the 20th century, whether alone or in assembly. Alongside the transformation of the instrument's appearance and changes in tuning, the repertory has also undergone substantial transformation. For most players and listeners of Georgian instruments, these new instruments are valued as a new way to express national identity. Although a small number of musician performers and most Georgian researchers of traditional music disagree, preferring to focus on the conservation of Georgian traditional music and also musical instruments. Traditional and modernized forms of a musical instruments coexist in Georgian culture. In this regard, one of the exceptions is the Georgian pan flute called Larchemi in Samigrelo and Soinari in Bulgaria, which has disappeared from everyday usage. Here I have an example, so you can see the touch, but please be carefully. A number of Georgian researchers have written about the Georgian panpipe. The most important works are those of Valentina Stechenko-Kukhdina, Dimitri Arakishvili, and Kahira Sebashvili. In addition, a very important ethnographic report is given by Sergei Makalatia. Fieldwork expedition materials, in particular audio and score examples, are provided by Mshvelidze, Stechenko-Kukhdina, Chijavadze, and Rosepashvili. Thus, our knowledge about the instrument's organology, ethnology, and musical repertoire is based on notes and materials gathered in the first half of the 20th century. Later, the instrument was revived and became established in Georgian stage folklore thanks to some individual enthusiasts. Traditional Larchemi Soinari. The Larchemi Soinari is one of the oldest Georgian instruments. One source proving the ancient existence of the panpipe among Georgian-related tribes is a Hittite bas-relief dating to the 2nd century BC, showing an image of a man in a chokha, traditional Georgian costume, with wheat and panpipe. One of the Greek myths tells us about Mita, the king of the Georgian Mesri tribe, who was himself considered to be the creator and disseminator of the panpipe. Musical spectacle competition are also described, a similar phenomenon to Nirzi competition preserved in Samigrelo until the 20th century. In the scholarly literature on Samigrelo, the existence of panpipe is emphasized, along with the Ochokochi, Georgian goatman figure, similar to the Greek mythological Pan, although the connection between them is not yet proved. A 2nd century figure of Pan playing the panpipe was discovered in Tbilisi near Tbilisi in eastern Georgia. 4 of 5 names of the Georgian Panpipe, Larchemi, Soinari, Ostuinari, Sastuinari, and Sastrapo, originated in Georgia. It is extremely interesting that in the 11th century work by Vasily Kesarian, 6 Days of Creation, translated from Greek into Georgian by Georgian Traditional, the term Soinari is defined as a panpipe. There is a discussion about the vase in the original text, dishware, vase, small barrel in the plural. So the term has not been directly translated, but replaced with its original Georgian analog, familiar to Georgians with its local name. According to the specimen and documentation available to us today, Georgian panpipes were usually made from 6 closed pipes, although there are examples with 5 pipes too. We have no sources about its tuning or repertoire. We don't know whether the 6-pipe flute is the developed version of the 5-pipe one, or if both coexist and play the same repertoire or not. The general principle of the pipe's layout is similar to the Slovenian pan flute, its longest pipe located in the middle. Steshenko Kuftina notated a very remarkable method of playing the panpipe. Performers press their lips tightly against gaps between the pipes, blowing in 2 pipes simultaneously so that the third interval is played. It is worth noting that the Ecuadorian rondador, the only one of the world's panpipe I have found on which 2-voiced music is played by one player, orders the pipes by their size. We have more information about the Larchemi social function and repertoire than for the Soinari. Here you can see the numbers of exams we have. The Larchemi is considered a shepherd's instrument in Georgia. There is documentation about playing it in 3 ways, all related to cattle. First, while going to pasture, second, while grazing, and third, while coming back home. In addition, villagers played the Larchemi at weddings and while marching after the overnight rituals of religious holidays. The Larchemi was also used to heal the sick through the ritual of catching the soul, in which 4 agrarian players participated. Unfortunately, we don't know whether the performers played the instruments simultaneously or separately. There was a form of competition between 2 Larchemi players in Samigrelo called Nirzi competition, an instrumental dialogue in which 2 performers divided the instrument into 2 and competed with each other. The winner was the one who played different tunes longer. When the Larchemi was divided into 2, each set of 3 pipes was arranged so that the longest one was located in the middle. Now we can listen one piece of music. According to notes recorded by Steshenko Kuftina, villagers played the Larchemi with the daira framed drum and svaneti and chianuri bowed lute. Also, in the ceremony after Holy Thursday, they played in each with the daira and wooden trumpet. We don't know how these 2 instruments sounded when performed in ensemble. Playing Larchemi and 3 instruments together must have been easier than the 4 Larchemi ensemble. The Gurian Soinari was connected to farming and traveling, especially traveling at night. Musical pieces for the Georgian panpipe have a cyclical form. There are no constructing sections, but there are signs of cyclical variations. The form is always open, and the duration of the piece depends on the performer. tendency of forgetting the instrument. Stechenko Kuftina noted with disappointment that the majority of society did not take this instrument seriously. The fate of the instrument was defined by its limited social function and the difficulty of making and performing it. The tendency of forgetting the instrument becomes clear after comparing the recorded audio materials and the analysis of the tunings. Stechenko Kuftina noted in the 1930s that the instrument had clear tuning and firm principles of production. Although in the 1950s Mosebashvili denied these principles after making ethnographic recordings. In his opinion, the tuning is dependent on the taste of the maker and of the instrument and performer. This tendency is connected to the loss of knowledge about the tunings and construction of the instrument. Here you can see tuning notated by Stechenko Kuftina and by, oh sorry, here must be Rusebashvili, and they're very different. The same repertoire sounding differently at different times, despite being recorded by the same performer, can be explained by the damage of the instrument. Some of the repertoire sounds out of pitch, as if it is played on an instrument with no tuning. Analysis of the frequencies and comparison of exams recorded in different times helped me to define the real tunings. I have defined the frequencies of each note of the audio recordings. For notation, the tunings, I have chosen the enharmonic versions of the separate notes that corresponded to the traditional principle of tuning. This one. Transformation of the instrument. The instrument doesn't exist in village everyday life anymore, although there are some attempts to revive it in regions and in the capital. The new life of the instrument is connected to the stage. In this new reality, according to the aesthetic of contemporary builders and performers, the look, material, tuning, musical possibilities and repertoire of the instrument have been changed. Only its timbre has been maintained to the central extent. One of the first attempts to revive the instrument belongs to the choreographer Georgian Traditional, an artistic director of the ensemble Iadoni from Furia. Here, what is my English? In this new reality, according to the aesthetic who tried to revive the Soinari and establish it in stage repertoire in the 1970s. The instrument is still used in two musical pieces, Sapundrugo and Daguna. Is very different from the traditional one. It is made of metal and bound with transparent plastic. It has 7 pipes, and they are located in order of length. The performing manner is also different. Unlike the traditional Soinari, on this instrument 2 pipes are not blown simultaneously, and polyphony is achieved by playing 3 instruments to accompany the song. Achieving polyphony with only one instrument is technically impossible because of the diameter of the pipes and their distance from each other. As for the repertoire, only instrumental transcriptions of songs are played. Larchemi is still made of arundo in Samegrelo. We must note that six-pipe instrument that belongs to folk singer Gramito Pipia, who remembered neither the tuning nor the traditional repertoire and only played his own composition. Thanks to Otar Kapanadze to give me this material. That's all we have from traditional Panpipe. We encounter the Panpipe in transport for Georgian folklore tool in the repertoire of Gordela, the ensemble of Tbilisi State University, where the instrument is only used to achieve a temporary and fragment timbral effects. Conclusion. The Georgian Panpipe is one of the most ancient instruments of Georgian instrumentarium. It stands out among the world's pan flute due to its original construction and polyphonic mode of performance. Despite the fact that the instrument has disappeared from everyday life, the score and audio sources available to us allowed me to research unknown features on the instrument. For instance, tuning and performance issues that are crucially based on the analysis of the frequencies in the audio recordings. Transformed instruments and their repertoires revived in contemporary practice are diverse. Sometimes they are somehow connected to the traditional repertoire, other times they are just used to achieve a timbral effect. As far as I know, there are some people in Samegrelo who wish to revive the instrument. I think possibly the notated and audio recordings available to us, as well as reconstructed versions approaching the original sound that has been decoded by me with the maximum accuracy could lead to the revival of the instrument at its traditional form. In that case, it could become again possible to play the traditional repertoire in the right way. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Nino for another very interesting presentation. A timely reminder in this case that panpipes are found in many other parts of the world apart from the Andes. So we wish everyone well with our revival efforts in that direction. And our final speaker is Baia Zhuzhunadze. She is a PhD student at Tbilisi State University, but she's also part of the team at the International Centre here at the Conservatoire as well. And she's going to speak to us today about the formal teaching and learning of Georgian traditional music at the turn of the 20th and 21st centuries. Thank you, Baia.
Good afternoon, and thank you, colleagues. So, my term is formal teaching learning of Georgian traditional music at the turn of 20th, 21st centuries. If we look back in the past 30 years, we will see the growing tendency of love to traditional music in the young generation. In the capital city and regional centers, you will find special state and ecclesiastical schools, educational institutions, private studios, where the interested can become practitioners. 7 choir master schools were opening in different parts of Georgia in 2003-2006 as part of the UNESCO project for safeguarding and promoting of Georgian traditional polyphony, realized by the International Research Center of Traditional Polyphony. The Folklore State Center of Georgia continues this path. Its zones of regional coverage encompasses Georgia's problematic mountains regions such as Raja, Javakheti, and etc. The special university, Georgian Traditional University for Chant, was founded in 2006. It specialized in the education of presenters and folk choir masters. Foundation of the university was a significant cultural event which contributed to the revival of Georgian traditional song and chant and their dissemination throughout the country. In addition to these institutions, there also exist special programs, workshops, summer camps for the foreigners interested in Georgian culture. Many people would like to learn it, but what is the system like? Which method do we use for teaching Georgian traditional music today? Georgian ethnomusicologists and performers often discuss this issue in social networks, blogs, but rarely research it. The paper briefly discussed basic tendencies of modern formal teaching learning. Naturally, under the modified social conditions in today's Georgia, it's very difficult to transmit folk music in an informal way. Currently, this form of teaching has practically been preserved only in families with musical tradition, and luckily yesterday on a concert we had the opportunity to listen to such families. In this reality, particular significance is attributed to the formal teaching learning, which has acquired leading function in the continuity of the tradition. The issues related with formal teaching are very urgent not only in modern Georgian reality, but in all post-Soviet socialistic countries as well, where traditional music plays a determinative role in the preservation of national musical identity. Folk music is formally taught in all aforementioned state or private institutions. Heads and tutors of these institutions are renowned bearers of traditional music of their pupils. We can say that there exists a common, systematically elaborate approach. Each tutor teaches basing on his own musical education or experience. Some of them are real traditional bearers. Others are professional musicians, those who have accepted folklore in ready form via formal teaching. Representatives of the second group, as a rule, have European musical education, which is naturally manifested in their performance or pedagogical approach. According to Brunet, people of this kind are polymusical. They can master 2 or more musical languages and simultaneously apply the thinking categories of these languages. Influence of European music is obvious in the performance of Georgian musicians of this kind. Their performance manner differs from that of folk performers and has more academic coloring. These influences are manifested in teaching approach as well. They frequently work with large groups of children or adults and actively use piano and notes in the teaching process. In the process of formal teaching, direct tradition bearers prefer ensemble music making. We work with small groups, teaching them via oral way or from archival recordings. They try to approach non-temperate model thinking as much as possible. Their pupils are sometimes referred to as neo-traditional singers. As background practitioner performer Svetlana Spajic wrote about this, quote, "A neo-traditional singer sounds as unusual as neo-Christian believer, but I have to realize that it's helpful and accurate in order to explain a bit of when, why, and under what condition I started to sing," the end of quote. As Professor Tsurtsumia noted in her paper, quote, "Some Georgian folklorists and performers call authentic the performance which imitates the performance manner of expedition recordings as much as possible," the end of the quote. I agree with her that such performance is secondary folklore or folklorism as it's accepted and studied ready-made. In today's Georgian reality, when many musical cultures coexist with the natural one, unimaginable is the existence of some or limited with explicitly one musical language. The change in communication technologies made the entire world multi-musical. However, in this reality, some musicians try to preserve and circumscribe their own musical identity to the maximum. Some are more open to this. Informal teaching, regardless of the tutor's approach, strictly offers authentic or tolerant such teaching learning of folklore is secondary anyway. Learning folk music performance. According to Simeone Kruger, experienced in ethnomusicology, the learning performance of music comprises 4 phases: discovering musical culture, discovering expression and form, experience, emotion, discovering value. Under the modern urban reality, teaching of traditional music in most cases is included within the context of strictly organized teaching space and system. The process is hegemonically formal and controlled. Only the first 2 out of the above-mentioned 4 phases are accentuated in this type of teaching learning. Often, performance' only chief goal is absolute imitation, of forms and expression means the object of imitation can be authoritative performer or archival recording. Within this approach, we got the so-called new reproduction of old examples with renewed timbres and improved technical quality, but these reproductions examples contain minimal musical novelty. Music making without experiencing emotion and discovering value contradicts with a sense of music as live creative process. Clearly, such approach decreases the role of improvisation. This is a rather complex problem from the standpoint of creativity, creating novelty, avoiding stagnation inside the existing tradition. I think main objective of formal teaching learning should be not to reconstruct an artifact, but give new life to it, not only to know the forms and structures, but to develop improvisation skill. In concert performance, this energetic circuit also includes a listener, who is only witness demonstration of non-personified and complex musical forms. Many folk music concerts are held during a year, which are attended by ethnomusicologists and folklore lovers. Performed are technically most complex songs studied via formal learning, but when it comes to closing the performer listener's energy circuit, miscommunication is frequently obvious. Balkan colleagues often point to the existence of this problem. When discussing the problems in Bulgaria, formal teaching Lozanka Pecheva writes that, quote, the why musicking of the students from the musical school seems to bring the discomfort and tension instead of enjoyment and aesthetical light. How to explain the situation in which the music of the old performers is more energetic and free than that of the young ones, who have the energy and freedom of youth? Is this related to the teaching and learning system which is used to educate the folk musicians? The same question arises in Georgian reality as well. I will also refer to Alan Merriam like Pecheva. Learning music is a part of socialization process. For Timothy Rice, music learning is a social, cognitive, and psychomotor process in which each individual looks for and expresses his own self. The existential question of the fourth stage of Erik Erikson's stage of psychological development, and this stage is competence, industry vs. inferiority, and he has raised this question: can I make it in the world of people and things? If we discuss this phase of psychosocialization from the field of formal teaching, it will be clear that mistakes in teaching approach frequently lead to inferiority, which provokes the problems of false singing, playing, uneven singing, bad staging when playing, etc. All researchers who touch upon the issue speak about the elaboration of the teaching and cultural strategy model, which will not add complex to the youth when transmitting the tradition to them, but will turn this music into the form of their self-expression, teach them to control their voice, body, emotion, making this music their chief musical value in the end. Spagit considers inclusion of the best ruler traditional bearers in the process as the solution. If we have a look at Georgian reality, we cannot say that young performers have relations with living traditional bearers. On the contrary, these elderly are the objects of their respect and admiration, and they are often invited to educational institutions, or performers often visit them in the villages, but these do not have a systematic character. I agree with Balkan colleagues that the education process should be freed from formality as much as possible. People should escape the role of passive learner. One must fully sense the psychophysiological benefits of music as a live creative process. From the standpoint of ethnomusic theatre, TAB and Children's Studio Ameri at its premieres foundation by Baia Zhuzhunadze had and still have the most correct approach, and my colleagues also had noted about this. Their performance maintains syncretic natural folk examples. They learn songs not only for stage, but also give them back to village. We remember a number of folk rituals revived by them in the village, such as Alilo, this is Christmas tradition, Chona, this is Easter tradition, and Lipanali. Such approach introduced by Edisho Garhani, they have many followers among young generation, which make me think the flaws of formal teaching can be overcome in future. Georgian folk music for foreigners. What and how we teach. Georgian folk music, particularly multiple singing, as the product of cultural tourism, is a rapid demand in the world. Summer camps have become popular in recent years, most of them held in Svaneti. Such camps are also organized in Najara. This is 2017, this summer camp in Najara. Also in Guri and Kakheti, but Svaneti holds leading position. Why Svaneti? This ravishing part of Georgia captivates the impression seekers with snow camps of the Caucasus, old towers, and archaic multi-part singing. In Swan music as well, tourism has changed music much like any other place where cultural heritage becomes the product of the tourism. But here too medal has two sides. Considering long experience of other traditional cultures, we clearly see that when conversion of an example of heritage into a product of cultural tourism changes it, but also prolongs its life. In addition to Swan, foreign performance repertoire frequently includes Megrelian and Gurian folk examples. This is neighboring regions of West Georgia. As you know, most complex examples of Georgian multi-part singing are encountered in Gurian dialect. However, this region is making first steps in the management of the musical tourism. For the most part, Georgian experts take the songs performed by foreigners with favor and tolerance, even if it is a modern interpretation, but they are stricter with the teacher. For instance, they consider it incorrect for a Swan teacher to teach Gurian or Megrelian songs, particularly Eastern Georgian examples. Since this field of cultural tourism is fairly young, much is still to be systematized and developed in terms of teaching and management. Main thing is that product and not its financial benefit are top priority. And conclusions in the end, basing on the summary of the aforementioned issues, it can be concluded. The change reality under the condition of globalization clearly shows that formal teaching has become basic form for transmitting folk music. Regardless of the flaws, it's a powerful tool for the transmission and preservation of tradition. The issues related to formal teaching are very topical for all post-Soviet states, where traditional music plays a decisive role in the preservation of national musical identity. To overcome the deficiency in teaching system, fruitful will be familiarization with and sharing a common experience. It's essential to elaborate the new strategies of teaching and culture, which will be focused not only on the reproduction of old examples, but on giving new life to them, to introducing methods of teaching in which more attention will be paid to experiencing emotion and discovering value. Turning tradition, musical heritage into the product of tourism has put forward new demands and challenges. Correct development and realization of these products is the future issue. As I mentioned in the beginning, the problem of formal teaching learning of traditional music has not yet been researched in Georgian ethnomusicology. The necessity of discussing this issue has been determined by the changes in the 21st century, and in the end, I have an example. This is Rusudan School of Singing and Chanting from Korea, and we can listen to the performance of these wonderful kids. So this is an example of formal teaching learning. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to Baia and indeed to all 4 of our speakers for this very rich and exciting panel. So I don't want to take up any more time. Let's use as much time as we have left to us now for you to ask questions. You may want to ask questions to individuals or to the group as a whole. One over here, thank you.
Thanks. If you hear me, or do I need a microphone? Okay. Thanks to all of you. All of you are close to me in a sense, in different sense, but very close. I have two points. One point is I would like to defend a bit the word imitation. Because it depends if it is artificial or if it is natural. I mean, for instance, I listen very much to different records of folk music, for instance, working with my students for transcription practice. And some of those recordings, so say, I listen them from year to year, 10 years, more years. And then I start to sing, and I simply sing like this person sings. And then sometimes I am accused that I am imitating. But I do not try to imitate. I imitate automatically. Because if I would like to, so to say, step away, it would be not natural for me. I can't. But if I sing in my folk rock band, then I use different mode of voice, not very folkish way, but so to say the glue to this style. So the first thing I want to say that imitation is not always bad thing. Okay. Then the second thing, it's simply question to Nino. It's very nice to hear this music of Skutuce. It is actually our panpipes. They sound actually as our panpipes. So maybe you brought it from us. No, I'm joking. Of course, but my question is, it's very interesting. So, what scales did you find in that music, in those tunings? Thank you.
It should be difficult for me to explain in English, but it is feminist. So it's the scale is with 6 notes. It's beginning from 7 degree. For example, if 7 degree will be S, it would be S, F, guess, then S, and then B.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
and I can show you this.
And do you find the same scale in all those examples?
In all recordings, the scale is quite similar. Not exactly the same, but quite similar. In recordings from 1930. But the recording from 1950, the scale is very different. And I think it's because these instruments are damaged and people are starting to lose it. Yes, because the same, sometimes the same players are playing in these 2 recordings, and the music is very different. They're playing the same pieces, but in different tunings, and they sound like they're playing damaged instruments. Yeah.
Thank you.
Britta over here.
I'd like to answer first about the imitation. I don't say that imitation is bad. I never.
Okay, I mean that very often they say.
Of course.
Not you personally, but...
No.
Thank you. Let's hear from Britta. Thanks.
Yes, also thanks for this excellent panel. And I just noticed that every one of you used a lot of Anglo-American literature. And so I was just wondering, when did the integration of English-speaking literature start in your research? Was it always there from the beginning? And also, like, is it now integrated into, say, the introduction into ethnomusicology courses? Are the books in your library, or are you using electronic material? So how did this transformation, or is this transformation taking place?
No, first of all, it is we have here introduction to ethnomusicology and the subject, and we talk about this literature. Secondly, our new generation knows no English, fortunately, and we can find very rich literature in the internet, and as well we have personal communication with the BrunoNet and with other, with Montague in England and so on, and we have this communication. We have possibility, for example, Netflix gifted us his third edition of his book, yes, and we translated this with the agreement of with the publishing house. And so we have some possibility to reach this literature. That's why, but it begins. It has began from 2002, I can say, and they are very young. Oh no! In the library we have not rich literature, but in the library of the center we have. For example, gift of Dieter Christensen, who gifted us a lot of journals, yearbook of ICTM, and so on. We have some literature. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all very much for this excellent insights in most different and fascinating expressive culture and your comments and ways to interpret it. I have a lot of questions and remarks, but we're not the time yet. Only a very small remark to the two papers on revivals. You use the term secondary ensembles. I'm afraid this will not be understood in the international community, right? It was Walter Biora or Felix Hörburger who coined this term in German, das erste Dasein, the first existence of. And then I don't know how it passed the Iron Curtain. In Russian it was a strong terminology in the folklore discourse in the 70s and the 80s. There are, so to say, the primary ensemble, what I call the reference culture, the selected regional cultures they studied. And there were the secondary ensembles, that means fieldwork-based ensembles, as in the golden ages of the 70s, of the 80s, as we have seen. And this distinction was quite clear. But the very term secondary ensemble will not be understood outside the former Soviet space. So just this very small remark. Thank you all.
Thank you. Can I answer to it? In my case, I just used that in the beginning when I was defining these three forms of the revival, and I had explanations. So I'm saying secondary folklore, which is stage folklore, original Georgian folk music performed on the stage, which is actually the equal of that.
Of course,
Yes.
I don't say that you don't use this
just
term.
to,
Of course, you can use it.
When I'm using, or we are using, we're like trying to explain what it means. So that's why I say that probably we can use that if we still explain it like...
Of course, of course.
I know. Okay, thanks.
This is a really important part of the conversation that we have in the symposium that we have here every 2 years, that we can't make assumptions about the terms we use, but also those of us who've grown up with Anglo-American literature shouldn't make assumptions about the theories and methods we talk about either. So, question here?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Here and then here. I'm sorry.
I also have a question for Teona. I think this question is not new for her, because we already spoke about this. About use of the term revival. Is it right in this situation? Maybe renewal and reshaping would be better. How can you revive what is not dead? Maybe it's not in a flourishing state, but it's definitely not dead. And another question about, you said that in Georgia there is no so much ethno-fusion music comparing, for example, with Estonia or other states. Why? Maybe because this old tradition is not dead?
Thank you.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yes. So about the first question, as I've seen some literature, I saw that different ethnomusicologists are defining term music revival differently. And the even essence of the word revival is understood differently. So I think that I can use this term if I offer the meaning, what I mean under the term, because I couldn't find any other terms which would be suitable to this situation. So maybe you suggest something. And the second question about, yes, I just told that in Estonia there is a bigger variety of the forms of ethno-fusion, and yes, I completely agree that this factor that in Estonia original folk music is not as actively used on but in two regions, as you taught me, there is some music still, right? But not as widespread as in Georgia, for example. But I think that in Estonian case, it wasn't only a reason why this variety appeared. And I think that Estonia was very close to Scandinavian countries and culturally during the Soviets. So it started this ethno-fusion music earlier than we did. So I think that it just affected on a variety. It just, I think that after some 20 years or something, we will have such kind of variety as well. So there can be this reason, what you told, but there is another reason of just spreading information in the country and musical information in this sense. Thank you.
Let's just take one more question.
Okay, thank you. It's very, very interesting to listen to you, and very interesting to hear what's happening here, and so much and so many new things. But I want to ask a question about the UNESCO list and the list of intangible cultural heritage. We have had discussions about this in many of the ESEM seminars, and really tried to think about both the benefits but also the disadvantages of ending up on such a list. And since this discussion has been so much about the two poles, the two renewal and preservation, could you say anything about, do you have fears that this kind of official list could cause more preservation and less renewal, or putting strains on tradition to develop?
Thank you. I worked with UNESCO some years, from 1980 to 2080 to 2014. and we'll discuss there a lot of nominations. And you know, I don't know how it works in Europe, in the European country, but I know there were a lot of projects from Belgium, from Dutch, from Norway, and from other countries as well, and they tried to establish their nomination in this list. But for us, I don't know. For some people, it is the impulse for nationalistic feelings. But yes, there is two sides of the medal, I can say. Maybe it is a contradictory question, because I can say, on the example of Georgia, it was very important for us. Why not? It is very important that government has obligation to support the ICH which is listed, and for us it was very benefit, because the government, we are economically poor country, and I can say that government not is very happy to give us a lot of money, but they supported the folklore, and all government before government, now they support this. For example, now was listed as well the Georgian wine as well, and it was very benefit for us. so I can say that I don't know how I think a lot of countries, but for us it was good.
Thank you.
I think the listing of the singing and the wine was good for us too. Razia, is it one more quick question? We're eating a little bit in our coffee break. Should we just take one quick question? Okay, Razia.
It's not actually a question, just comments.
Okay.
First of all, I was really impressed with your absolutely wonderful panel. Congratulations. Apart from discovering so many common features with traditional Central Asian culture, who suffered so much from Soviet ideology as well, and I'm going to talk briefly about it tomorrow. Apart from that, I would like really congratulate you, because you, Professor Rusudan Tsurtsumia, you brought up such fantastic followers, very good students, bright and determined, and the level of your study of your ethnomusicology is really impressive. So congratulations.
Thank you.